Is Russia planning on going scorched earth in Kherson? Is the Wagner Group the only fighting force left in Russia? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It is October 21st, 2022, and this is your daily Ukraine update, and we're going to be getting some answers to all these questions right now. Let's break it down. Okay, first and foremost, on the tactical map, let's talk about the changes to the situation. First off, we have in the northern part, the Kharkiv front, right? We look here near Lyman, and you can see that Russian forces are, again, it's tough to say if they are really pushing back, but as we've talked about, this wood line here is a good natural defensive position. As we've seen in other footage, having some tree cover prevents the enemy Ukrainians from using their drones to look down on Russian troops. And while a lot of the time it almost looks like Russian troops don't really get the message, maybe someone in charge finally has and is using these wood lines as fighting positions to keep the Ukrainian forces, meanwhile, in this section here near Terny and Yampolivka. Right, you can see this is actually probably a pretty dangerous territory because it is no man's land, right? This is a tough place to fight. And when we switch to the satellite view, you can see here, yep, here's all these wood lines where Russians can dig in, set up fields of fire, right? Here's an urban area where Ukrainian forces can naturally use defensive positions, but between it is just open fields of fire. So it's going to take a fair amount of firepower for somebody to really decisively gain a hold here. I suspect that this doesn't actually reflect Russians being dug in here because this is only from Russian line, from this forested area to the urban centers here is only, it looks like probably like maybe 8 kilometers, right? So well within range of mortars, even some larger machine guns and crew-served weapons. So it means that anybody that crosses through these fields is going to have their work cut out for them, and I think that's why you're seeing this territory sort of swing back and forth. I don't think it reflects a real danger to these troops dug in here. But when we zoom out, let's get it back to our topo, right? When we zoom back out, okay, there we go, the default. We can also see there's some minor changes here as Russians try to dig in and shore up some of these locations. I'm not even sure, again, this like zero value territory, I'm not sure these count as advances in the sense that we're talking about. This is more like repositioning. Again, using the natural, assessing what is the natural cover and concealment, how are we going to use terrain to improve our defensive efforts? Because for almost every Russian force, they seem to be on the defense. The only exception, of course, is the Wagner Group. This is the private mercenary company who's trying to show Putin that they are the real fighting force here. Here's the problem. For literally 3 months, they have been trying to take Bakhmut, and somehow they are pushing forward in territory continuously, but it's not clear that it's achieving anything. For example, this village of Optne, you can see they've been like trying to push towards it in all sorts of different ways, never really succeeding. I think at least twice Russia has claimed to have seized this village. They have, of course, seized Odradivka, and again, it's almost like hard to characterize this as having seized it. They have gotten it. It looks like literally like a small neighborhood, but they have pushed forward and taken it. And I think this is probably part of a larger strategy. Obviously, Ukraine does not want to lose Bakhmut. They don't want to lose any territory. But when you are in a conflict like this, you have to make operational trade-offs. And here's the thing. If the Wagner Group guys, if they want to come out of their foxholes, expose themselves to enemy fire, to dig out the tactically worthless area of Odradivka and seize, a neighborhood. I don't know, maybe they're going to go trick-or-treating here or something. Then what you want to do is punish the enemy for their mistakes. And so you can trade space for time, right? If the Wagner mercenaries took a lot of casualties, seizing something that's valueless, then it's probably going to be a good trade-off for Ukrainian forces if they're not going to get the combat power to engage in a counterattack, which we're going to talk about Kherson in a minute. They may have their combat power tied up elsewhere. But you guys can see that, again, this territory they're taking, they're not major roadways leading anywhere, right? They're oftentimes seizing pieces of roadway that Russian forces already control. They're not denying maneuver to Ukrainian forces. You can see here that basically Ukrainian forces have no use of this major roadway here, which is sort of like what the Wagner guys are trying to capture, maybe. I mean, you could see here, yeah, again, these are like roadways that Russia already controls. When you seize these roadways, oftentimes they can be advantageous because they can deny the enemy use of territory further down the line. If they were to seize, let's say, somewhere like this, like, not really Klitscheva. If you could seize like Ivanetsky, right, it would impede Ukrainian forces' ability to resupply Bakhmut, right? You can make these trade-offs down the line, but seizing many of these roadways, Ukrainian forces already aren't using them because they only lead to Russian territory. Russian-controlled territory, excuse me. But what I think is key is that these advances by the Wagner Group, they're not tactical, they're political, right? And right now, what Berezkin wants to be able to tell Putin is, my forces are the only ones seizing territory. And we've discussed this. Some Wagner groups actually supposedly have a financial incentive. They're paid based on territory seized. So it would make sense in that environment that you would want to make these tactically meaningless incremental gains, even if they come at tremendous personnel and material cost. And you can see that's exactly what they're doing, right? None of these, there doesn't look like there's a strategy to seize Bakhmut here. This is just a general broad advance. And I think Ukrainian forces probably would be happy to inflict casualties on this Wagner group as they push into this strategically worthless territory, or operationally worthless territory. Again, as long as they hold Bakhmut and they control these two major road routes into Bakhmut, they have nothing to worry about these guys pushing into this relatively worthless territory. But now let's talk about where Ukraine probably has its combat power and where the Russians are currently worrying about the most. In fact, they might be preparing for some serious scorched earth, and that is Kherson. Now, in Kherson, right, Russia saw, Institute for the Study of War makes a good point that they discuss that after Kharkiv, right, the Russian forces panicked, left a lot of equipment behind, and they lost a lot of that territory, not necessarily because of individual military failures, but because they were not prepared to withdraw in an orderly fashion. They're not going to make that mistake in Kherson now that the pressure is being ratcheted up. And as we've talked about, a lot of Ukrainian combat power that was pushing in Kharkiv probably by now has moved down to Kherson to support that effort. So the Russians are doing a lot to prepare for a orderly retreat. We've talked about them ordering the evacuation of civilians from Kherson. By civilians, they mean usually the collaborating administration. But more significant is that it appears that they are taking out a lot of other things. First off, they are pulling out, let's see if I can find this here, looted fire stations like fire trucks, stolen civilian cars, household items. They are trying to take anything of value and of anything of military value with them as they move it to the southern side of the Dnipro River. And as you can see here, right, the Dnipro is probably going to be their final line of retreat. If they give the order that Kherson is going to fall, they're going to head to the south across the Dnipro River, right? Where again, their supply lines get even better because they're still connected in a lot of ways to the Crimean Peninsula and to occupied territory there. But Russia has more than just that. There, of course, it wouldn't be Russia if they didn't plan on committing a war crime on their way out. And this, we're going to turn to ground.news, the essential in transparency. Let's see if we can find it here. There we go. This is the discussion of the false flag operation around a hydroelectric plant. Right. And what Ukrainian President Zelensky is doing here is actually starting to prep the information space himself by stating that Russia is planning a false flag operation at the hydroelectric plant. This is, of course, validated by some of the activities that Russia itself is doing. The HPP holds back 18 million cubic meters of water. And when we look at the map, we can see it's located right here. You can actually see where it's dammed the Dnipro River. And when we zoom out, you can see almost exactly where the original river flowed from. And that Kherson is built largely in some low ground that used to be in the path of this river. And so as Russia retreats, it's believed they will potentially blow this river, blow this dam, causing flooding all the way down the Dnipro, right? Taking out small bridges, making crossing the Dnipro way more difficult for advancing Ukrainian forces, and it will flood a significant portion of Kherson. This sort of destruction of civilian infrastructure for little to no military gain could be considered a war crime, especially given how punishing this is going to be for the remaining citizens of the civilians of Kherson. But what's interesting to me is that Russia appears to be preparing in a really ham-handed way for this eventuality. Literally, Russian sources are accusing Ukrainian forces of shelling the dam, and they've widely circulated graphics depicting the flood path in the event of a dam breach. For an event that you're trying desperately to avoid, they really do seem to be messaging exactly what they're planning on doing, and even made a helpful little infographic. Of course, this is just going to be first, punishing the citizens of Kherson for not collaborating with Russian forces. And more importantly, it's going to be blocking Ukrainian forces from pursuing Russians as they retreat. Right now, having this plan in place, it probably means that the Russian forces really are feeling the pressure right now, that there is a significant force really ratcheting up the heat in Kherson, and they've done a lot to really make it seem like they are preparing not just militarily for a potential for the Ukrainians to liberate Kherson in the south, but for a military collapse there, or they're rather trying to avoid a military collapse, but they may avoid this collapse by creating the very event they're trying to avoid, namely the fall of Kherson. But again, that is all I had for you guys for today. Thank you so much for joining me. Of course, be sure to check out our sponsor, ground.news. Link is in the description. And if you want access to uncensored combat videos, the kind that YouTube just will not let me show you, I do breakdowns of all of them on the Patreon. Thanks so much to my Lieutenant Tier patrons. Last day on the road, and I will have you guys shouted out at the end of the video. I'll see you in the next one.